Thank you. All right, so tonight I'm going to be talking about shadow IT. How many in the audience are familiar with this concept of shadow IT? Good enough, yeah. So we've all heard it a million times. Like if you are a security practitioner, you probably come to many talks in which they talk about shadow IT. And I'll define it in a second, but I want to make it clear that this talk tonight, the target audience would be the people who work in organizations and any kind of technical ops or security ops, and also for the executives. This is a first for me. I'm actually talking to a corporate audience instead of talking to, more technical audience. So don't think it's going to be too professional because that's not the way this works. So first off, I want to start off with defining shadow IT. A lot of people will tell you different things depending on which vendor's trying to sell something to you, but it really comes down to unsanctioned IT operations or unsanctioned IT practices. And that's usually what people talk about when they talk about shadow IT. But I'm going to argue tonight that there is much more to the shadow IT crisis than what you see in all of those vendor data sheets that they send you. So moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about the things that you typically hear about with shadow IT. You have these scary headlines that you'll see where 40% of IT spending is outside of IT's control. I mean, that's pretty terrifying. And a lot of people will sit there and be like, how does this happen? And we've all seen this, whether or not you've been spinning up rogue IT infrastructure or if you're just in accounting, because at some point during your job, you notice that you have to deal with a website called Salesforce.com. And you realize that you hate your life immediately upon having to use Salesforce.com. And it's not Salesforce's fault. It's a pretty versatile platform. If your IT departments actually came in and understood, what was going on there, then maybe things would be a little bit more organized for, the users. But because of that, you have someone in accounting who needs to do some process that is very convoluted because whatever site or page that they have to go on and fill out some form has 15 other categories that don't apply to anything in their job role, but they have to do it every day. Sound a little familiar to what you probably experience at work, that stupid process that you have to go through using some technological resource? And so this person will start, thinking, God, this is so inefficient. Like, why am I sitting here wasting so much time doing this process because someone who doesn't understand my job told me I had to? So they go in and make an Excel macro because they know how to do that, and they start doing that job function that they used to do in the appropriate manner in an Excel macro. And then their efficiency goes up 63% in 3 months. Wow. They're able to do something way more efficient. Everyone's loving it, and this is exactly what you want. Someone who's going in there, finding a problem, and creating a solution. The problem is in that process, that user is able to then go and be like, why do I want to work for an organization that's so inefficient? I have to deal with these types of things. So they apply elsewhere and they get to put on their resume about how they boosted the efficiency of that company, and they go elsewhere. They hand it over to someone else who really doesn't even know Excel macros and doesn't know that you have to update the data manually to make sure that this little efficient system works. So 5 months goes by and all of the data is incorrect. Now that 63% efficiency that you gained over a 3-month period is completely lost, having to go back in this Salesforce and add all of that data back in the way it was supposed to. And a lot of times we look at these problems and we like to throw those technological solutions at what we're dealing with. And what I'm going to argue today is that maybe the user isn't always who we need to blame, because we can all clearly see where some jackass threw up customer data on an Excel spreadsheet and it was on an S3 bucket that was exposed to the internet. I mean, what a dumb user. Why the hell did the user do that? Do y'all ever do root cause analysis? Do you ever look and see why someone did something and maybe think, maybe the user's not always at fault, maybe it's our business process or our technological implementation? And so it's not a big surprise when you see headlines like this, because people are tired of having to deal with IT operations. Has anyone ever had to get a firewall rule approved to do your job? How long did it take to do that? Why does it take so long? Because we have to have all of these security checks and balances, and people have egos and silos and jobs that they have to maintain. And so everyone else in your organization is tired of it. A lot of you are probably tired of it, but we don't really do that necessary introspection. And to be corporate facing, I'm trying to get all my sources to be what I feel is a lot of people look as reputable in this space. So Gartner, which is depending on how you feel, how vendors pay them off, or if you think that you can trust them, the truth is that your board members do trust them. So reality doesn't really matter at that point, as you already know, because when we're having beers, you're telling me those frustrations. And so when they tell you that, by 2020, a third of successful attacks experienced by enterprises will be on their shadow IT resources. This came out in 2016. I could imagine that that's probably been pretty true. If you actually collect security analytics in your organization, you might actually be able to verify that. And I want to go back to that headline because the point I'm trying to drive home tonight is this. If you look at that headline, what that says to me is this. That's the reality. And if that does not resonate, then it should. Because what's happening is shadow IT is the driving force of people being just upset with the way things are being done. And it's a grassroots effort to remove all of us from our positions. And you know what? I can't blame them for doing it. Because what are we actually doing here? What has our job been as technologists this entire time? We've been here to enable a workflow for a business operation. And what do we spend our time doing? Fighting about which department gets funding and all these things. And of course, you're going to tell me that these are decisions made way higher above you. But this revolution started without any of us, and it's going to continue to go. And so instead of fighting the change that's occurring, I think we could be a part of the solution. And if you've been here at any meetup before at this event, you see me in the back of that room, and I commonly call out what I feel is wrongdoings by speakers. And so I encourage the same thing. I want this to be an active discussion because I'm pretty serious about what I feel is the ramifications of all of this. And the reason why I speak up is not to be an asshole. It's because I feel like people are just hearing the same thing over and over again, and they're hearing the way we've been doing things for 40 years. And the way we've been doing things for 40 years has got us to this mess we're in today, because everyone relied on us and we dropped the ball, and we continue to. So I would encourage us to take a lesson from science fiction, and we look at Tron. If you look at the original Tron was the savior. He was an application made to protect us from the bad guys. And as time evolves, people think, well, God, I got a security solution in place. Let me enhance this. And then you turn into Clue, which we find out in the sequel is like the natural progression of, all of those bad thoughts and practices when we just allow something like this to go away. One thing that I want to remember if you've watched Tron is, I'm a really big geek right now. So that's the whole point I wanted to take away. That there's literally no other reason for you to pay attention past this point. So I think that it's really important for us to do some introspection as practitioners, as technologists. And I feel that a lot of people in security organizations can fit in these buckets that are kind of like tools that you might commonly come in contact with. So I would look at organizations who understand that IT operations and technology operations in general is not just a cost center. There are people who can make the business case to your board to, make the legitimate case that we need to have positive feedback loops. If we look at the DevOps movement, it's all based around a business concept that makes sense. And we get caught up on the tools and the frameworks and what people are doing and all the security implications when you forget the most important reason why we're all here is for the business. And so when you see those agile environments and those businesses that support it, you get something that may not be like you're reinventing something, but you do have a functional wheel. And it can keep rolling on even though that there's obstacles in the way. Then there's some of you who completely realize all of this, but you're too busy digging yourself out of the tunnel. You think that continuing to invest in these broken, on-prem, antiquated systems is somehow a really good idea. And if you can't convince your decision makers to change that process and be more like the wheel, then I'm sorry, but you're just going to keep using the shovel and keep digging yourself into a hole. And then there's the last one, the butt plug. The one that it just ends up being a pain in everyone's ass. And the only ones that seem to enjoy it are the butt plugs themselves. And that's an alarming amount of security and technological operations out there today. You are a hindrance. You are a cog in the gears. You are bolting on security. All this bullshit that you hear about people saying shift left, that doesn't just apply to people in DevOps environments. That's just ops, okay? And as we move forward, a lot of you are going to feel like that's a little uncomfortable, but, you know, so is having to work with a butt plug. So I want to move forward and look at like what we can actually do in the world that we live in. This is cloud architecture. This is all this new thing that everyone's telling you. Every vendor is selling you these solutions. Everyone's sitting there telling you to be scared and to also embrace. And so it's very confusing for everyone. But I want to assure you, because a lot of people like to move at a very slow pace, especially if you're a butt plug, hopefully, that the cloud architecture that you see today is nothing new. It's just the right time for it. We finally caught up with it. I hear people say, oh, this type of thing is not new. I mean, mainframes, and we used to, you know, have thin clients and all this stuff. What's new about all this? It isn't. It's just the way we do it now. Is that right? And a lot of that comes from just the way computing has changed. We look at the Cray supercomputer. It was really sexy, but it was really expensive. It's actually the origin of the price, like when they got the price, that was the origin of that shit Cray. Was because this shit's expensive. It was very specialized, and they would market it as having like some you know person sitting here on a chair, like it was furniture. It looks really great, and I'm not trying to, you know, say anything negative about Cray, but the reality is stuff like this ends up changing the world. This is the Beowulf cluster that NASA developed in 1994, and the same type of architecture is basically what we have today. When we look at the way that we're doing parallel computing, and we look at like cloud architecture, what it actually looks like in a data center. Of course, this is consumer hardware, and that's not necessarily what people are deploying in data centers. Some are, but not everyone. But that's what real innovation looks like. When a lot of people, I feel, are still looking at Cray supercomputers, this is the type of thing. It looks very scary. I mean, look at that. Like, who would trust anything with that type of setup? Well, you can trust it because this computational power right here was able to pay for all of this and still be cheaper than what you would have paid for if you went with an enterprise solution. So if I went with scalable servers, I could pay for this entire thing for like 2 or 3 of them, right, at the time. And so then we just use the same amount of infrastructure, just duplicate it. So this can all fall and that can continue. That's what cloud architecture is it not? I mean, that's the whole point. This isn't new. These people are who you can thank for having this entire world that we have to live in. The whole generation that has grown up with cloud technologies, these are the people behind it. In 1994, they invented the smartphone. They invented cloud architecture. The first instance of cloud architecture was this. So when you see these types of things, it's really scary, but it's already existed. It's just the right time for all of it. And when we're looking at this complex architecture, it's very scary, but you've got to do it at some point. Everyone's going there. And when you look at headlines like this, that's kind of scary, especially when we still have a shadow IT problem that's been a plague for on-prem solutions. And one thing that I think that a lot of people are going to have the hardest time working past is this right here. Does anyone know what this might be? Any network people? It's a star network topology. This is basically what all of your network architectures are based around today, for the most part in your enterprises, is a star-based network topology. And that was great when things were on-prem and we did things location-based. And when vendors are sitting there trying to scare you about 5G and all of the looming things with that, It's because people have been thinking like this for so long. And that's not the reality that we're living in. This is the type of network infrastructure that I'm talking about. This is the network infrastructure that will be the way it is going forward. Mesh architecture, peer-to-peer, decentralized technologies. It actually makes a business case now. Sure, we've been using it to pirate stuff for years, but this type of technology existed for a reason. Windows 10 uses peer-to-peer for their software updates. I mean, this isn't something like Tanium. What's one of their biggest things is that they can do peer-to-peer distribution in a decentralized manner. What makes those people so exciting is because they get this. And guess what? It's not hard to understand mesh networking. And as a matter of fact, when you start leveraging this, you can do things you can never do in a traditional network setting. Because we can do this in a software-defined SIG. So that means we can enact security controls and policy on every single connection and start having, instead of this old antiquated view of this old network topology, we can start having peer-to-peer connections and mesh networks that are all application-based networks. Imagine all of the security controls that you could put into place and how secure you can make things if every single application had its own network. Like, you can't currently do that today. I guess you could with a ton of VLAN tagging and a lot of really hard network configuration, but this is the way it's going. And a lot of people just cannot wrap their heads around this type of security architecture, network architecture at all. But it's something you've got to learn, or you know what, you're going to be left in the past. And this is something that I really want to point out, is that Gartner has these 3 security market predictions that they published in 2018. And one of the key things there is that by 2021, requirements for greater efficiency and threat response will drive 20% of buyers to heavily weight automation in buying criteria. Automation will be key, and you can read that if I'm too boring, but the key comes down to this, is that automation is the way that you need to be thinking about everything going forward. If you want to be a part of the problem, then don't think about automation. But if you want to be a part of the solution, don't just think about how automation is going to impact me. Think about how I can leverage automation to make my organization better. You should start thinking about every single time you're in a cell, every time that you're dealing with any of your security products, all of that telemetry that comes in, every action that's done, you need to start thinking about how can this be automated? How can we at least collect all of these actionable data and be able to use that to train things later on? Because you may not have the technology today, but you need to be collecting as much telemetry as possible so you can hand it over when you do have these mechanisms in place. And I don't have to tell you Moore's Law, but it's not a dead concept. It's just the way that we do our architecture. Moore's Law is dead, don't get me wrong. If you just looked at CPU-based architecture, what has even happened there, right? And if you look at some of those Kurzweilian people who believe in the technological singularity, like in 20 years, we're going to be, androids, basically. We're going to be cybernetic. I don't think that that's necessarily going to play out in that time frame, but when we shift the way that computing is rated here, if we start including the newer ways that we're doing mass computation with GPUs, and you include that, you can see that this curve is still continuing. And those who understand these types of trends are going to be able to be at the curve and be able to be ahead and not sit there and wonder like, God, I just spent $250,000 on already antiquated architecture. I mean, it's a common thing here. So don't think just because the traditional concept of Moore's Law being dead, if we look at newer computational methods, it is still very much alive.
Hey, Whiskey.
Yeah.
Back on the automation part.
What's up?
Abstraction, right? So, like, it's not all just about automation. It's also about abstracting out data so you can talk to all the vendors with the same piece of code. And that's part of the automation part, but it's a piece right before it.
Yeah.
You have to abstract out. So you can talk to all the firewalls, all the switches, all this different vendor across the board with the same code. Otherwise, automation will fail.
Yeah.
It'll fail miserably.
Yeah, I mean, going forward, the number one thing I recommend to people is you look at solutions that are built around not human readable logging formats, right? Like, why are you spending so many cycles parsing human readable data when you could just have JSON do all of the hard work for you, and then you turn that into human readable data? I mean, you need RESTful APIs to be able to have all of these things communicate, and you need an automation framework on top of it. And here's the beautiful thing. Once you do this transition, and I'm not just talking about cloud as in you're paying AWS or Azure or one of those. You can utilize cloud technologies on-prem, and why anyone is still going to be purchasing VMware in 2019, I don't know why. Because if you're not aware, you can get way superior solutions with open source technologies that are infinitely more scalable and robust. And here's the beauty. When you rip and replace, that can be automated too. How many times in history can you go and rebuild your entire stack on-prem and in the cloud without even having to physically be there? We're there. And if you're not aware of these technologies and you're someone who does that role, it would be kind of scary to probably, come to terms with this reality. If you're a network admin, if your job is to log into a Cisco switch and manually fat finger that misconfiguration, you're not going to have a job because guess what? There are people actively working on an abstraction layer to remove you. As this continues to happen right now, if I had to have like a little Moore's law graph of progression of where a receptionist can do the job of a network admin, if this was the scale, we're about right here. And this is within a 5 to 7 year period of what I'm talking about here. So if you look at the next 5 to 10 years, I really think that you should start contemplating what side of this you want to be on. And here's the point. So we look at the way that the economy is going globally. We are seeing more of what they call M&A, what I call corporate consolidation, where you see more of these larger organizations that are continue to merge, and they're not looking so much at innovation as much as they are looking at spaces in which they have money to acquire and just become bigger. And this sounds very draconian, because it kind of is. But we can't blame anyone but ourselves, because if we were doing this right, this would have never happened to begin with. And so this is the natural progression of the way things are playing out. And if you look at the corporate consolidation, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that it's occurring way more now than it ever has before. And it's only going to continue to occur. And so when we start looking at the reality that we have today, we have Amazon with the major tech giant it is. We have things like Google. We have things like Monsanto, which also got bought out since I used this graphic. So this continues to occur. And we're starting to look at the world that was in this robot. And I don't want to live in that world, even though it kind of looks like we're about to. And of course, along with their predictions, regulatory compliance is going to be a big deal. But I'm going to go one more on that typical talking point and point out that you have to also understand that your multinational companies are not going to be US-based as much as they have been traditionally. You're going to see a big expansion in China, which I don't know if y'all noticed. You probably have a lot of things that you're, dealing with on a day-to-day basis from threats in China. Hell, if you can have China send you a single packet, you could probably clear funding for a lot of things if you bring it up to your board. It is a growing economic threat to our country, and as depending on your organizations, this is something that you need to look at from a cybersecurity, cyber defense perspective. So I'm really good at throwing problems out, not so great at necessarily bringing the solutions, but I'm hoping maybe this is, the whole thing here. When you look at automation and where these things are naturally going, why I'm saying all of this is all that telemetry that I'm talking about, all of those actionable things, depending on whether or not you implement those things in your organization or not, those major organizations are doing that anyway. So your vendors 5 years from now will not probably even be talking to a lot of us. They'll be talking to a decision maker who has 1 or 2 people manage their entire IT infrastructure. And what are we going to do about that job crisis? Because I don't know about y'all, but the job crisis I hear about today is that we don't have enough people in technology and cybersecurity. And there's a lot of people out there that will try to get you to come into this industry and will teach you a lot of antiquated ways of thinking. And I am urging a lot of people to reevaluate maybe where they're looking at getting education resources. You know, a lot of the things that you see up here are healthcare related. And if we compare the IT industry to healthcare and all of the different facets that you can go through in your educational path, and compare that to technology, oh, I gotta have a CS degree. Okay, that has nothing to do with my day-to-day operations, but that was real cool. So I went and got a degree, got out in the job field. They won't hire me because I don't have the experience. La la la, I've heard that a million times. Well, what are we doing about it? I try to do something about it. I am very active in the community, and I try to, engage and help with this problem, because I think it's very important that when you are looking at educational resources, that you just don't blindly follow whatever is in front of you. You would surprise you how many resources in the DFW community you could go to without spending a dime. How many people who would be willing to mentor you without you having to, shell over hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's all out there. I've never gone to college. I barely passed high school. And if I could learn all of this stuff, I'm pretty sure anyone who knows how to Google could, or DuckDuckGo, whatever. But if I have to wrap all of this up, a part of what I would encourage people doing as part of the solution is be more like the Tron mentality. Instead of looking at users as obstacles, start looking at the user's obstacles and work towards a real solution that benefits not just you and their workflow, but the business overall. If you have any flack in that argument, then the counter is counterintuitive to the business operation. So it's a pretty fun argument to have to, have. So one thing that I want to remind you is that the last thing that Tron does say before he dies heroically is, I fight for the users. And if you have that type of mentality, if you think about the consumers that are affected by our decisions to not do our jobs right, if you think about the people who don't have power or might have their entire way of life ripped out from under them if we don't do our jobs. I'm so passionate about security, not because it's my job, not because it's something that I think is fun. I'm here because I truly do believe that if we start this type of thought process of thinking about the users and enabling them and defending them and actually caring about their data not being at risk, or at risk, yeah. And instead of looking at it as risk, I hate that term risk. What is with corporations looking at people's livelihoods as risk? Should never be an acceptable risk. If you're going to fuck my life up, that should never be an acceptable risk for any organization. And I think that that's a hard pitch to sell, and that's why I'm here. Because if that resonates with you, I encourage you to also go out and fight for the users. Because if there's enough of us out there, then maybe we could do something. And some of you are actual decision makers. Some of you can turn around tomorrow and actually be a part of the solution. And I encourage you to do that, because we need you to do that. And I would also encourage you to not be a dinosaur. When you're out there trying to be a part of this solution, think about the overall goal that we're trying to achieve. Don't think about your own personal gain. Don't go out there and think about this as just a way to get ahead in your career. Think about this as actually solving the whole reason why we're here, which is to protect our world's infrastructure. And you can do this, but if you don't, give it 5 years and the vendor will be replacing your job. That's all I gotta say. So that's it. That's all I gotta say. Any questions? Yeah.
What about people who are going to retire in 5 years?
What now?
What about people who are going to retire in 5 years? Do they still need to care?
Yeah, because if you don't, then you're just, there's one important thing that you have to understand when you look at IT operations, is the concept of technical debt. And what you are doing, if you just look at your retirement and you don't give a shit, what you're doing is handing it off to someone who actually does, and they have years of your technical debt that they have to work through. Technical debt is the definition of that shovel analogy, and that's what not giving a fuck has done to us. That's what not giving a fuck has done to our nation's infrastructure, our world's infrastructure. And all I'm really saying is maybe we should just give a fuck.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So, any other questions?
Just to your point about degree, you're 100% right. No one gives a shit about a degree. It's all about passion, innovation, what you know right now.
That is also a lie. Because from someone who's taken a very non-linear path in life, I can tell you it's very hard to get anyone to pay attention to you unless you have a microphone and you curse in their face about how they're doing things wrong and it resonates. It takes a long time sometimes for someone who doesn't, have that college degree or the ability to have one to be able to be successful, but you can do it,
And then throw a felony out there, and you're fucked.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, if you work with someone who's an advocate, you knows how to get around that with companies like me,
Right.
then that doesn't make a difference.
I think
That is true.
And also to the point,
Yeah.
and also to the point as well, there's going to be statistics show there's going to be 3.5 million open cybersecurity jobs by 2021.
And that's the thing.
I think that's the concept of the shovel though. Like you're talking about someone who's like, hey, admit's out here and admit understands your capabilities and admit's gonna fight for you. But what about the rest of the room? Like we're talking about an entire industry where there's only certain people who are willing to step up, not only in their local community, but like for the individual to say, hey, I'm gonna help you out. I get that you may not have a cert, I get you may not have a college degree or a master's degree, but I totally understand that you have the experience, so let me help you through it. Like a huge component of what he's saying is like, we're not there as a community. And that's a huge deficit.
And the thing is there is a job gap, but it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, like by the time the people who just got their cybersecurity degree are actually useful, they're not going to be needed. It's like if you were to learn Pascal in college at any point since 1995. Only you're expecting. Think about it. Like, how many of you went to college, and how many of you were actually useful when you got out of college? And how many people are we throwing into college today, and how useful are those college graduates? That's my point. This is the job crisis they're not talking about.
We're very useful. They create a lot of debt and interest. And
Yeah, exactly.
They're also not teaching graduate shit.
All right, so is there any other questions, comments, whatever? All right, well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.